picking up pointers and going off with them and talking about the types and styles of music.
But the interesting decision he had to make was he going to go on with his architecture course, which is obviously 5-6 years, even longer, or was he going to change and stick with the band? And I said, well, if you do go with the band, realise you might be up against managers who want to take your money off you quite quickly and efficiently. They're better at it than you are. Or you're going to carry on with architecture. And he said, well, I've got the opportunity, I've got to take it. So my suggestion was, well, you could take a year out from architecture and take up the band, see how it goes from there. You know, he liked chatting about what he was doing up in London whilst he was doing his course. And he thought they were a really good band, you know. He knew they were good. I think he's very self-directed. He's very self-assured, very confident. And he knew he was doing the right thing. That's what I thought at the time.
This is where we're going. This is where we're coming.
I think he knew inside himself it was the thing he wanted to do. And he had that chance, he had to take it at the time. So his drive and determination ensured that he made a success of it.
You don't expect somebody who's been working in your bar to go on and be a megastar, so that was surprising in itself. But the fact that he was always very interested and would follow through on anything he did, that didn't surprise me.
When Guy made it, I think everyone here was really absolutely pleased for him. They were really glad to have known him here. His friends at school similarly, and really pleased he'd made it, because he's the sort of guy you want to support and help, and like to see him get on. It was really tremendous, and I think everyone here really envies what he's doing, but they're not jealous of it. They're really pleased for him that he's done so well, because he hasn't really changed. I think that's the key thing that people will say about him. He hasn't changed as a human being. And he comes back occasionally when he's in Canterbury.
Drummer Will Champion grew up in Southampton and started playing drums from an early age. In fact, he learnt to play a wide range of musical instruments, including the tin whistle as an adolescent. A fan of Irish folk music, Champion played guitar in a band called Fat Hamster before joining the ranks of Coldplay.
I think Will's got this physique where he looks quite hard, so he often ends up in places for no reason whatsoever. Well, when I saw them in Stockholm last year, somehow people started to pick an argument with him. There's nothing to do with him whatsoever, because he's a drummer, and he's got #1 haircut. People think he's a hard boy, but he's lovely, really.
The members of Coldplay had grown up from their respective corners of England, and before long were to meet and turn their early years of music experimentation into one of the world's top bands. Converging on the capital's University College of London in 1996, the four guys hit it off instantly and became best friends. And before long, all four friends shared a burning, insatiable passion for music and a quiet belief in themselves, determined to be as good as they could possibly be.
The early days was the classic student band. They all went to university together. They were sort of friend of a friend, and he had a friend over here and he had a friend over there. Some of them played hockey, and Will actually was a guitarist. He had an old vintage Telecaster, and they had an audition for a drummer who didn't turn up, and said, Will said, "I'll just sit in," and he became the drummer, gave his Telecaster to Johnny. So it's all the classic sort of fumbling around for an identity. And the problem they had was they were a classic student formation, and it sounded like a classic student band at first. And I think the people initially didn't take them seriously because they just looked like a bunch of sixth formers, albeit at university. It felt like a bunch of sixth formers with no lectures to go to. So let's write some emotional ballads and sort of feel sorry for yourself.
From the beginning, there were no ego clashes, no agenda, just purely a devotion to music making. And Guy Berryman was so convinced by the band's chemistry and potential that he dropped out of university. Soon, the band began performing around London venues, and decided that the time was right to record their first EP. Coldplay cut their Safety EP in 1998, and Martin's school friend and later band manager Phil Harvey helped finance the 3 songs, recorded at Sync City Studios in London. Coldplay produced the EP in tandem with Nicky Rossetti and Ron Niblett.
They actually came down to Starfish first of all, and then after a little while they came in and said, "Oh, you know, we've changed our name. What to? It's Coldplay." And that was that. That's how we first got to know them as Coldplay. They recorded 8 songs, I believe, for the Safety EP and chose those 3. And then came in at a second time to record a track called Brothers and Sisters, which is really nice. And that was shortly before they released Yellow. I always thought they were distinctive, you know. There's Chris Martin's voice, obviously, you know, which is makes your ears prick up and that sort of stuff. And John was always, he's one of those blokes that was never quite happy with the, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but with guitarists, they're never happy with what they do, you know, and he wasn't any different from that, you know. But he was he had a very definite idea of what he wanted his guitar to sound like. Will and Guy were just, it's just one of those things you get from time to time, you know, where a bass player and a drummer just play well together. They just seem to sort of like know what each other's doing, kind of thing, which is, it's quite rare, you know, it is quite rare, that. And as a unit, as a working unit, I mean, they all seem to have a definite idea and very focused on what they were doing.
I had lunch about 12 months ago with somebody, a very key figure in EMI Records, and when they were approached by Coldplay in the first instance, the band sat them down over a beer and said, "We want to be the next Radiohead." That was their missive, that was their direction, and they didn't mean just the sound, they meant the whole concept and the whole global success. And I think they've already done that. I mean, bear in mind, in '97 they were just a bunch of students, really, and now they're like one of the biggest rock bands on the planet. 6 years later, that's a pretty quick turnaround.
As 1999 kicked in, record label Fierce Panda were overwhelmed by the Safety EP and signed Coldplay for a one-off deal. And the quality of these songs soon caught the attention of NME and Radio 1's Steve Lamacq, who offered much praise. By the summer of 1999, the guys became the subject of a bidding war and eventually signed a recording deal with Dan Keeling at Parlophone Records and a publishing deal with BMG. On July the 10th, 2000, Coldplay issued their intensely awaited debut album, Parachutes.
First time I heard Parachutes was a week before the actual release. I've got a promotional copy, and I was kind of disappointed on first hearing. I thought it was very obtuse, a little lightweight. Really, if I'm being harsh, it sounded like a sixth form band sitting around in their little room at uni on campus, writing fairly self-indulgent ballads. The lyrics were largely nonsensical on first hearing. There was a degree of repetition in the sound of the guitar. It was kind of nice, but it didn't really do it for me. But it was such a grower. Within like 3 or 4 weeks, I started to separate all the songs off. So Yellow obviously was the highlight, but the Shiver, the single Shiver, and, you know, stuff was really starting to get its own personality. And the thing about that album that was good for Coldplay was it was kind of their personality. It was like meeting them at a bar. That album told you what they were about. And although they've gone on to surpass that album easily, that first Lung Player was a great introduction in retrospect.
Parachutes is a modern masterpiece, a work of popular art. The tunes are melodic, understated and beautifully delivered. Drive Time DJ from London's Heart 106.2, Rachel Hopper, is a huge fan and follower of the band.
I think when I first heard it, there were standout tracks. Shiver was the big standout track for me, even though